It was just another Tuesday for Michael Harrington. A 43-year-old tech billionaire checked his expensive watch as he climbed the stairs to his private jet. He had meetings in Tokyo that couldn't wait, and the board members were getting nervous about the new product launch. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington," said the flight attendant as he entered the cabin. Michael barely looked up from his phone, just giving a small nod. He didn't notice that she wasn't his regular attendant. He didn't notice much about people these days. Elise Chen smoothed down her uniform and tried not to feel intimidated. At 29, she had been a flight attendant for 6 years, but this was her first time on a private jet. She was only here because the regular attendant had called in sick, and she needed the extra money. "We'll be taking off in 10 minutes, sir. Can I get you anything before we depart?" she asked. "Just coffee. Black," Michael said, still typing emails. The plane took off into the darkening sky. Michael finally put down his phone and closed his eyes. The past week had been hell. Investors asking questions, competitors releasing similar products, and the constant pressure of being responsible for thousands of employees. Sometimes he wondered if all the money was worth the stress. 3 hours into the flight, Elise noticed the weather report on her monitor. There was unexpected turbulence ahead. She secured the cabin and informed Michael, who merely frowned and continued working on his laptop. The first bump was small. The second was stronger. By the third, Michael's coffee had spilled across his expensive suit, and the plane was shaking violently. "Sir, please put on your seatbelt," Elise said firmly, all politeness gone in the face of safety protocols. For the first time, Michael really looked at her, calm, professional, but with concern in her dark eyes. He quickly buckled up. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Harrington, we need to make an emergency landing. There's an airport in Anchorage we can reach in 20 minutes. Michael's face went pale. "Emergency landing? In Alaska?" "It's just a precaution, sir," Elise explained. "The storm ahead is worse than expected." The landing was rough but safe. As they exited the plane, the pilot delivered the bad news. "The jet needs repairs. Some electrical systems were damaged by the turbulence. We won't be able to continue until tomorrow at the earliest." Michael ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "Find me a hotel, then." The pilot looked uncomfortable. "That's the problem, sir. There's a fishing convention in town. Every hotel is booked." "You must be joking," Michael said coldly. Elise, who had been making calls on her phone, stepped forward. "Sir, I found one option. There's a small cabin for rent about 20 minutes from here. It's the only place available." "Fine. Book it," Michael snapped. An hour later, they stood in front of a tiny wooden cabin in the Alaskan wilderness. Snow was beginning to fall. "This can't be right," Michael said, looking at the small structure in disbelief. "It's all there is," Elise said simply. She opened the door to reveal a cozy but tiny interior, one small kitchen, a living area with a fireplace, and what appeared to be just one bedroom. Michael stared at her. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" "The owner said there's a pull-out couch," Elise replied, trying to keep her voice professional. "I can take that, and you can have the bedroom." As they stood awkwardly in the doorway, the snow began to fall harder. The wind picked up, howling through the trees surrounding the cabin. Neither of them knew it yet, but the next 24 hours would change both their lives forever. Michael sat stiffly on the wooden chair, staring at his useless phone. No signal, no internet, no way to contact his team. The cabin had electricity but no Wi-Fi, and the snowstorm was blocking cell service. "Would you like some tea?" Elise asked, already moving around the small kitchen like she owned it. She had found tea bags, 2 mugs, and a kettle in the cupboards. "I prefer coffee," Michael said, then caught himself. "But tea is fine. Thank you." Elise filled the kettle and placed it on the stove. The owner left some food in the fridge. "I can make us a simple dinner." Michael wasn't used to someone taking charge. Usually, people waited for his orders. He watched as Elise opened cabinets, checked supplies, and moved with easy confidence. "Do you cook often?" he asked, trying to be polite. "Every day," she said with a small smile. "I live with my sister, and we take turns. She's better at it than me." "You live with your sister?" Michael couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked a meal for himself. His mansion had a chef on staff. Elise nodded while chopping some vegetables. "Yes, she's younger than me. She's in college, studying to be a doctor. Her face grew serious. At least, she was before she got sick. Michael felt uncomfortable. He wasn't good with personal stories. I'm sorry to hear that. She has a rare blood condition. The treatments are expensive, which is why I picked up extra shifts. Elise kept her eyes on the food she was preparing, like tonight's flight. The small cabin suddenly felt even smaller to Michael. Here he was, angry about missing meetings, while this woman was working extra hours to save her sister's life. What about you, Mr. Harrington? Do you have family? Elise asked, changing the subject. No, no family, Michael said shortly. And please, call me Michael. We're stuck in a cabin together after all. Elise nodded and served the simple but good-looking pasta dish. They sat at the small table, the wind howling outside. This is good, Michael said after taking a bite. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something not prepared by a professional chef. Just basic cooking. Elise shrugged. Nothing special. They ate in silence for a few minutes. How did you become a billionaire? Elise suddenly asked. When Michael looked surprised, she added, Sorry, that was too direct. No, it's fine, Michael said. I created software that companies use to protect their data. Started in my garage at 22, and it grew from there. Just like that. From garage to billions? Michael almost smiled. Not just like that. There were many years of 18-hour workdays, many failures before success. And was it worth it? Elise asked. The question caught Michael off guard. No one asked him that anymore. I don't know, he answered honestly, surprising himself. After dinner, they sat in the living room. The fireplace gave the only light, as the power had gone out due to the storm. The wind was getting stronger outside. It sounds like we'll be here longer than expected, Elise said, looking out the window at the heavy snow. Michael nodded, feeling strangely calm despite the situation. He should have been furious about missing his meetings, about being stuck in this tiny place, about the millions of dollars he might lose. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the simple relief of not being in charge for a few hours. Tell me more about your sister, he said suddenly. Elise looked surprised but began talking. As she described her sister's dreams, her illness, and their close relationship, Michael realized how empty his own life had become. His days were filled with meetings, decisions, and money, but nothing like the love this woman had for her sister. The fire crackled between them, two strangers from different worlds, temporarily sharing the same small space. The morning brought no relief. The snow had piled up to the windowsills, and the wind howled even louder than before. Michael stood by the window, watching the white landscape with a frown. The pilot just radioed on the emergency line, Elise said, coming in from the bedroom where the radio was kept. He says it's the worst storm they've seen in 5 years. We're stuck here for at least another day, maybe 2. Michael ran his hand through his hair. 2 days? That's impossible. I have meetings that can't be moved. I don't think the storm cares about your meetings, Elise said with a small smile. When she saw his face, she added more gently, I'm sorry, I know it must be important. Michael paced the small room. The Tokyo deal is worth millions. If I'm not there to finalize it, can someone else handle it? Elise asked, putting a pot of water on the wood stove. The electricity was still out. No, nobody else has the authority. Michael's voice was tense. My company is launching a new technology next month. This deal is crucial. Elise nodded and stayed quiet. She understood pressure, but a different kind. The kind that came from watching medical bills pile up while your sister got weaker. The cabin grew colder as the day went on. Elise found more blankets in a closet, and they both wore layers of clothing. Michael surprised her by knowing how to keep the fire going. I wasn't always rich, he said when he caught her watching him stack wood properly. I grew up in a small house in Minnesota. Winters were cold there too. I didn't mean to stare, Elise said. It's just that you seem so capable. You sound surprised, Michael said, actually smiling for the first time. Most rich people I've served on flights can barely open their own water bottles, Elise admitted. They both laughed, and something in the air between them changed. As evening approached, the temperature dropped further. The fire wasn't enough to heat the whole cabin. They huddled in the living room, wrapped in blankets, sitting closer to each other than they had before. Tell me about this new technology your company is launching, Elise said, trying to distract Michael from their situation. For a moment, Michael hesitated. Company secrets weren't shared with strangers. But here, in this isolated cabin, normal rules seemed far away. It's medical technology, he said finally. A new way to treat blood diseases that doesn't require expensive medication or invasive procedures. Elisa's eyes widened. Blood diseases? Like what my sister has? Michael nodded slowly. Possibly. It's designed to work for several conditions. We've been developing it for years. That's amazing, Elise said, her voice barely a whisper. It could help so many people. That's the plan, Michael said, but his face clouded over. At least that was my plan. The board wants to price it high, limit access to premium hospitals only, maximize profit. But that would mean people like my sister couldn't afford it, Elise said. I know. Michael stared into the fire. That's what the Tokyo meeting is partly about. Finding partners who share my vision instead of my board's. The wind rattled the windows. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing in Michael's mind. What made you start this project? Elise asked quietly. Michael was silent for so long that Elise thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, more human. My mother died of a similar disease when I was 14. We couldn't afford the treatments. Elise's hand found his in the dim light. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The fire crackled. The storm outside grew stronger. And in that small cabin, something was changing between the billionaire and the flight attendant, something neither of them had expected. As they sat side by side, sharing warmth and stories, the differences in their bank accounts seemed to matter less and less. The third day of the storm brought a moment of hope. For a brief hour, the satellite phone in the cabin caught a signal. Elise immediately tried calling her sister. Lisa, can you hear me? Elise's face lit up when the call connected. Yes, I'm fine. I'm stuck in Alaska because of a storm. Michael watched her from across the room, pretending to read an old magazine he'd found. He couldn't help noticing how her whole body seemed to relax at hearing her sister's voice. But then everything changed. What? When did this happen? Elise's voice sharpened with fear. What did the doctors say? Michael put down the magazine. Elise's face had gone pale. I'll try to get there as soon as I can, she said, her voice shaking. I love you too. Stay strong. When she hung up, she just stood there, holding the phone tightly. What happened? Michael asked quietly. Lisa's condition is worse. She's in the hospital. Elise's voice was flat, like she was trying hard not to cry. They'd moved her to intensive care. The treatments aren't working anymore. Michael felt something twist inside him. He knew that fear. He remembered sitting in hospital waiting rooms as a teenager, watching his mother grow weaker while doctors used words too big for him to understand. I need to get back, Elise said, looking out at the still falling snow. Somehow. The pilot said the storm won't clear until tomorrow at the earliest, Michael reminded her gently. I know. Elise finally let the tears come. But I need to be there. She's all I have. Michael stood awkwardly, not sure what to do. Comforting people wasn't his strength. In business, emotions were seen as weakness. But here, in this cabin, business rules didn't apply. He walked over and hesitantly put his hand on her shoulder. Tell me more about her condition. Maybe I can help. Elise looked up in surprise. How could you help? My company's new technology, the one I told you about. Michael's mind was racing now. It might be suitable for her case. I need more details. For the next hour, Elise explained everything about Lisa's condition. Michael listened carefully, asking specific questions about her symptoms, the treatments she tried, and the doctor's diagnosis. This sounds exactly like what our treatment was designed for, Michael said finally. The first clinical trials showed a 78% success rate for similar cases. But you said it wasn't available yet? Elise reminded him. It's not officially launched. The treatment exists. We've been testing it for months. Michael paced the small room. The FDA gave preliminary approval last quarter. Hope flickered in Elisa's eyes. Could Lisa be part of the trial? Michael stopped pacing. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. She doesn't need to be in the trial. I'm going to make sure she gets the treatment as soon as we get back. But how? You said you're bored. I own 51% of the company, Michael said firmly. I've been playing by their rules to keep peace, but this is why I created this technology in the first place. Not for profit. For people like Lisa. For people like my mother. Elise stared at him. You would do that? For a stranger? Michael looked at her, really looked at her. After 3 days together, she didn't feel like a stranger anymore. You're not a stranger, Elise. And yes, I would do that. The satellite phone rang, making them both jump. It was the pilot. Good news, Michael said after a brief conversation. The storm is weakening faster than expected. They think we can fly out tomorrow morning. Elise's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Michael. He stiffened at first, then slowly returned the hug. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. Something shifted inside Michael's chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time began to thaw. The storm outside was finally ending, but something new was just beginning. Morning arrived with clear skies and bright sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape sparkle. Michael stood on the cabin porch, breathing in the crisp air. For the first time in years, he felt strangely refreshed despite the difficult situation. The pilot just called, Elise said, joining him outside. The plane is fixed and ready. We can leave in 2 hours. Michael nodded, looking out at the mountains in the distance. You know, in all my travels, I've never actually taken time to enjoy views like this. Too busy making billions, Elise teased gently. Something like that, Michael admitted with a small smile. They packed their few belongings in comfortable silence. The past 3 days had created an unusual bond between them, the billionaire CEO and the flight attendant, who under normal circumstances would never have exchanged more than polite greetings. Before we go back to our regular lives, Michael said as they prepared to leave, I want to show you something. He took out his phone, which now had a weak signal, and opened a secure folder. This is the medical technology I told you about, the complete research files. Elise looked at the complex diagrams and medical terms on the screen. I don't understand most of this. You don't need to, Michael said. What you need to understand is this. I'm making you a promise right now. Your sister will get this treatment, at no cost to your family. Elise's eyes widened. Michael, that's too much. You barely know us. It's not too much. In fact, it's not enough. His voice grew firmer. This technology was meant to help people like Lisa. That was always the purpose before profit margins and shareholder values got in the way. What will your board say? Elise asked. Michael's expression hardened. They work for me, not the other way around. It's time I reminded them of that. As they walked through the small town toward the airfield, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, Michael continued sharing his new vision. I'm going to create a foundation, he said, walking slowly so they could talk. It will provide this treatment to patients who can't afford it, starting with Lisa. Elise stopped walking. Why are you doing this? Is it because of your mother? Partly, Michael admitted, but also because of these 3 days. Being stuck in that cabin with you made me remember something important. Something I'd forgotten while building my empire. What's that? Elise asked. That the reason I started my company wasn't to become rich. It was to solve problems and help people. Michael looked directly into her eyes. You reminded me of my real purpose. They reached the airfield where the private jet waited, gleaming in the sunlight. Reality was about to return. When we get on that plane, Michael said, things will be different. I'll be the CEO again, and you'll be the flight attendant. But I want you to know that I'll keep my promise. Elise nodded, suddenly aware of the different worlds they belonged to. And I have a promise for you too. What's that? I promise to hold you to your word, she said with unexpected firmness. Not just for Lisa, but for all the other patients who need this treatment. You've shown me who you really are these past 3 days. Don't forget that person when you go back to your boardroom. Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, accountability to something more than profit margins and stock prices. It's a deal, he said, offering his hand. Instead of shaking it, Elise hugged him briefly. Thank you, Michael. As they boarded the plane, both knew that the real test of their promises would come once they returned to the real world. a world that tried to keep billionaires and flight attendants in very different circles. But something had changed during their 3 days in the Alaskan cabin, something that neither CEO power nor social barriers could easily erase. 2 weeks had passed since the Alaskan storm. Michael sat at the head of the conference table, watching his board members shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. He had just finished outlining his new vision for the company's medical division. "Let me make sure I understand," said Gregory Wells, the oldest board member. "You want to create a foundation that will provide our new blood treatment technology at minimal cost to patients who can't afford it." "That's correct," Michael said calmly. "And you're personally funding this foundation with $50 million? Asked Rebecca Chen, the financial director. "Also correct." "Michael," Gregory leaned forward, "this will affect our profit projections for the next quarter. Shareholders won't be happy." Michael tapped his finger on the table. "I own 51% of the shares, and I'm very happy with this decision." The room fell silent. They had never seen this side of Michael before. For years, he had played the game their way, focusing on growth and profit above all else. Something had changed. "The press conference announcing the foundation is scheduled for next month," Michael continued. "I expect your full support." As the board members filed out, his assistant handed him a note. A Ms. Chen called. "She said to tell you the treatment is working." Michael smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. He hadn't spoken directly to Elise since their return. He had kept his distance, wanting to avoid any appearance of impropriety, but he had made sure Lisa Chen received the experimental treatment immediately. Meanwhile, across the city, Elise sat beside her sister's hospital bed. The change in Lisa was remarkable. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her latest blood tests showed significant improvement. "Miss Chen," a doctor entered the room. "The latest results are very promising. At this rate, Lisa could be discharged within a week." "Thank you, doctor." Elise squeezed her sister's hand. After the doctor left, Lisa looked at Elise. "You never told me exactly how you got me into this experimental program. We could never afford something like this." Elise hesitated. "I met someone who helped, someone important." "The mysterious billionaire from the storm." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You should call him. Thank him properly." "It's not that simple," Elise sighed. "His world and mine. They're very different." But later that night, Elise found herself staring at her phone. Michael had given her his private number before they parted. "For updates on Lisa," he had said. She hadn't used it yet, sending messages through his assistant instead. Finally, she typed a simple message. "The treatment is working. Lisa is getting better. Thank you for everything." She pressed send before she could change her mind. Across town, Michael was working late when his phone buzzed. When he read Elisa's message, something tight in his chest loosened. He typed back, "I'm glad to hear it. This is exactly why we developed this technology." He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said in Alaska. All of it." In her small apartment, Elise read his response and smiled. She typed, "I've enrolled in business classes at the community college. Still planning to open that clinic someday." Michael replied, "Need an investor." Their simple exchange of messages felt both professional and personal, balanced on the edge between two people from different worlds who had shared something extraordinary. At his desk, Michael looked at the foundation proposal he was drafting. At the top of the page, he had written a temporary name, the Lisa Chen Foundation. He changed it to the New Purpose Foundation. Some promises were meant to be kept, even when the storm was over and reality returned. Some connections, once made, couldn't be broken by returning to different worlds. The billionaire CEO and the flight attendant had both been changed by 3 days in Alaska, and they were both determined not to forget it. 6 months passed quickly. On a bright September morning, Michael stood before a crowd of reporters, doctors, patients, and investors. Behind him, a large screen displayed the logo of the New Purpose Foundation, alongside images of patients whose lives had been changed by the new treatment. "Today marks not just the official launch of our revolutionary blood treatment technology," Michael said into the microphones, "but also the beginning of a new mission for quantum innovations. From this day forward, making this treatment accessible to everyone who needs it will be our top priority." Cameras flashed. The The stock market analysts in the audience typed furiously on their phones. Since Michael had announced his new direction, company shares had initially dropped, then surprisingly risen as public support grew. From the back of the room, Elise watched quietly. She hadn't told Michael she was coming to the press conference. She stood in her uniform, having come directly from a flight, just to see this moment with her own eyes. Lisa stood beside her, healthy and strong again, holding a small sign that simply read, "Thank you." After the presentation, Michael answered questions from the press. A reporter asked, "Mr. Harrington, what inspired this sudden change in your business approach? You are known as one of the most profit-driven CEOs in the tech industry." Michael paused before answering. "Sometimes it takes getting caught in a storm to see clearly again. This was always the purpose behind creating this technology. I just lost sight of it for a while." His eyes scanned the room and suddenly locked with Elisa's. For a moment, surprise showed on his face, quickly replaced by a warm smile. When the press conference ended, Michael made his way through the crowd toward Elise and Lisa. "You came?" he said simply. "I had to see it for myself," Elise replied. The promise kept. Lisa stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Lisa Chen. I wanted to thank you personally. Your treatment saved my life." Michael shook her hand. "I'm very glad to meet you, Lisa. How are you feeling?" "Strong enough to finish medical school," Lisa said with a bright smile. "I'm more determined than ever now." As they talked, Michael noticed the textbook in Elisa's bag. Business Management 301. Elise nodded. "I'm halfway through my certificate program. The clinic plan is becoming more real every day." "We should talk about that," Michael said. "The foundation is looking to partner with community clinics to deliver treatments locally." A photographer approached, asking to take a picture of Michael with the first patient to receive the treatment. As Lisa posed with Michael, Elise stepped back, watching the scene with mixed emotions. Later, as the crowd thinned, Michael found a moment alone with Elise. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice softer than before. "Busy. Flying, studying, planning." Elise smiled. "You?" "Fighting with my board. Changing company policies. The usual," he returned her smile. "But it's been worth it. 1,300 patients have received the treatment so far. I saw the numbers in your presentation. It's amazing." Elise hesitated. "I wasn't sure if I should come today." "I'm glad you did." Michael looked at her directly. "What happened in Alaska?" "Was a storm," Elise finished for him. "A beautiful, unexpected storm that changed things." They both understood what remained unspoken. The connection they had formed was real, but they had chosen different paths to honor it. Not a romantic relationship, but something equally meaningful. "My assistant will contact you about the community clinic partnership," Michael said, returning to a more professional tone. "If you're interested." "I am," Elise said confidently. As they parted ways, Michael to his waiting executives, Elise to her sister, both carried with them the knowledge that their brief time together had created ripples that would touch thousands of lives. Some storms don't destroy. Some storms clear the air and wash away the dust, revealing what truly matters. 1 year to the day after the Alaskan storm, Elise stood nervously in front of the small building that would soon become the Chen Community Health Clinic. A modest sign hung over the entrance, and inside, newly delivered medical equipment waited to be installed. "Are you ready?" Lisa asked, standing beside her sister. Now fully recovered and back in medical school, Lisa would work part-time at the clinic once it opened. "I think so," Elise said, taking a deep breath. "I can't believe we're actually doing this." A black car pulled up to the curb. Michael stepped out, looking different than he had a year ago. His expensive suit was the same, but there was something changed in his face, a lightness that hadn't been there before. "Congratulations," he said, walking up to Elise. "The clinic looks perfect." "We couldn't have done it without the foundation's support," Elise said. "Thank you for believing in this." "The foundation has supported 30 similar clinics across the country now," Michael told her. "But this one is special." Inside, Elise proudly showed Michael around the small facility. 5 examination rooms, a treatment area, and a small laboratory where the blood treatments could be administered locally. "Tomorrow's opening ceremony will be simple," Elise explained. "No press, just the neighborhood families and local doctors." That's appropriate, Michael nodded. The real work happens after the ceremony's end. When Lisa went to check on a delivery, Michael and Elise found themselves alone for the first time in months. Their paths had crossed at foundation events, but always surrounded by others. You've done amazing things this year, Elise said. I read about the changes at your company, the new research divisions, the patient accessibility programs. And you've created something remarkable here, Michael replied. From flight attendant to clinic director in a year. Elise smiled. I'm still flying 2 shifts a week. I can't quite give it up yet. Old habits, Michael agreed. I still work too late most nights, despite promising myself I'd change that too. They walked to the small office at the back of the clinic. On the wall hung 2 framed items, Elise's business certificate and a photo of the Alaskan cabin where everything had changed. You kept a picture of that place? Michael asked, surprised. It's important to remember where turning points happen, Elise said simply. Michael nodded. I have the same photo in my office. My board members don't understand why I want to remember being stranded in a storm. Do you ever regret it? Elise asked suddenly. The changes you made to your company, the money invested in the foundation instead of expansion. Michael looked at her thoughtfully. Not for a second. My company is actually more successful now than it was before. Turns out having a purpose beyond profit motivates people in ways I never expected. And, Elise hesitated. Do you regret that we chose this path, professional collaboration instead of exploring what might have developed between us personally? Michael finished her question. Sometimes I wonder, but I don't regret it. Neither do I, Elise said. What we built instead has helped thousands of people. Outside, more cars were arriving, clinic staff coming for final preparations before tomorrow's opening. I should go, Michael said. I'll be back for the ceremony tomorrow. At the door, he turned back to Elise. A year ago, I was a different person, focused only on deals and profits. You reminded me that true success isn't measured in dollars. And you showed me that dreams can become reality with the right support, Elise replied. We both transformed. They shook hands formally, but their eyes shared the understanding of 2 people who had witnessed something remarkable in each other. As Michael drove away, Elise looked back at her clinic, the physical manifestation of a promise made during a storm. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't about reaching romantic destinations. Sometimes they're about finding your true purpose and helping others find theirs. That was the real life-changing magic that had happened during those 3 Snowdon days in Alaska. 2 people from different worlds showing each other paths to becoming their best selves. And that was worth more than any other kind of happy ending could ever be.